I just want to set a little bit of my own predisposition, because I had not, although my experience as an architect is doing everything for the first time. We never did a film centre, we never did a public space, we never did a school until we did them first time, and I never did a theatre until we did the Lyric. It took a long time, but it was starting from a position and starting from a kind of predisposition of being interested in theatre. And what I find very, very interesting is when you have your mind made up about how you want to approach something, there's another part of your mind that has to stay so open, because what you do is you learn by doing. I mean, in my life, that's the pleasure of it. So I learned disproportionately, I would say, in the Lyric, learned an enormous amount from this project. But something about the timing, which is why I have Willa Cather on the wall, is about two lines crossing, things that you have in your mind anyway, a kind of crossing of external circumstances and private purposes, let's say. So we won this project at Open Architectural Competition just over 8 years ago, and it always felt like it was a sort of destiny line or a lifeline to do it. I put up these sketches of Alexander Calder, which he made in 1926 in a beautiful book called Animal Sketching. And Calder is an inspiration to me because he's, as a sculptor, he has this predisposition that there's life in the body. You know, I think of a building as a body, and life is embodied, of course, and life is contained, but the thing itself has life. And when Calder talked about sketching cats, he's reminding us in his book that even a cat asleep has intense action. And I find that an inspiring thought, that it's a building may be slumbering, it may not move, but it embodies action. And the second predisposition, you might say, is this beautiful set of drawings from Darcy Thompson's famous book about mathematical transformation, published in 1904 or something. It's called On Growth and Form. And what he's comparing related species by putting them all on a grid and saying that these two fish are essentially the same. They've just been affected by forces which affects their development. And I think that's also a kind of interesting thing to think, that you may dream of a fish like this, life may deliver you a fish like this, but they are the same. And thinking about the rough forces of nature which impact hard on an architect's life, I think you have to learn to think that things that are pushed, that things that are impacted by the external forces are the things that you love most. You know, even the acoustic form of this bone in the hand was like a first thought for the acoustic form of the Lyric Theatre in its wrapping around. This is the first sketch ever made, that I ever made for the Lyric, which was based on as you can see, based on very little knowledge of anything except that there would be an auditorium and a stage. But my thought was I would take away the difference between backstage and front of house, and I would wrap it around like a scarf and say that because Lyric is a performing theatre, producing theatre, that all the people who work in Lyric work in theatre. If they work in the box office or if they work in the finance section, very important, they still would say if they were out for the night, well, I work in theatre. So I thought this old-fashioned boundary in a producing theatre between front of house and back of house was not relevant. So a lot of our work was to try and make a house for Lyric. Then you come to look at the brief, and it has a number of fixed components. This sketch is not quite 10 years old, but it's again part of the learning process about the limits of the site and about the forces of if not nature, at least the forces that are irresistible on the way you have to design such a restricted site. But the components are the auditorium, the rehearsal, and the studio space, and those components through the various stages of the design stay the same. So at the very earliest stage, there was always a rehearsal room, there was always a studio, and there was always an auditorium, and there was always some generous foyer. In our first dream of the project, based on that sort of scarf wraparound idea, there was rather a lot of foyer. Richard Wakely is in the audience. In fact, this is an intimidating audience because Conor O'Malley's in the audience, whose parents set up the damn thing, and Richard Wakely is in the audience, who's a master of English language. And when Richard Wakely says a word like strategic review, it means start again, John. But I had this sort of wish that in a very tight site that the space would open up. This is because I think that going to the theatre is itself participation in the theatre as a modest audience member, if you know what I mean. I think when you go out to the theatre, every part of it is the theatre, not only the strength of the performance, but the occasion and the kind of awkward feeling at the interval of why do they have intervals? Why do people ask you at intervals what you think of the play when all you want is a drink? And but I think there's also a procession about who else is at the theatre, and so in the first thought of the building, there's a lot of space, and in the tightness of how it is achieved, I think what we have found is that it's possible to find space even in very crowded situations. I want to, for those of you who will go one day or might go another, or haven't been yet, I want to just describe what's going on in this building. It's a very densely planned and occupied building. On the left-hand side of the slide, it's on a sloping site, so there's nothing on this side. It slopes down and you enter at the low end. So on the left-hand side, you see that there's an education room and a boardroom, which are really affect the basement of the building, but they open out to a garden, so kids can come in from school. And outside the education room, not on this drawing, but outside the education room, we have been able to build an outdoor amphitheatre in the grass, which is a really nice thing that, again, like thinking that you might make movies in Meeting House Square, I always wanted to make an external amphitheatre, and I'm happy to say there's one there now. And the board get to look at the river, and then there's the nuts and bolts of the business of buying tickets and ushers and so on, and the equipment for them. And then you have to make your way upstairs through the building because it's a climbing site, and you come in low and you have to go up high. So we thought of the stairs itself as a sort of given auditorium space. You can perform on the stairs. There are elegant toilets with huge ladies' toilets. The changing rooms are interesting because the building is in a basement, and in the changing rooms where the actors are, they come through and under the auditorium and come on stage left and stage right. So there's a great little kind of gladiator's tunnel for the actors to arrive. But the public move upstairs and are sort of flipped towards the bar, and then flipped again towards the studio theatre, which I'll talk about, and then the main auditorium. And then as you rise up through the building over the bar, in its own private area is the rehearsal space. So you see here really the three components of the building. Auditorium for 389, I think. A studio for about 150 people, and a rehearsal space which has to be sized to suit the performance stage and the studio stage, so that effectively they can have three things going on at once. And they're all separated from each other, acoustically separated and access separated, so they can program at different times and be used at different times. And then if you imagine them as three, if you can accept a mixed metaphor, if you can imagine them as three brick rocks, made in pointy, angly Belfast brick, they're kind of on to you. Then the space between the three brick rocks is the flowing space that is for social activity. Up top, you're in the grid space over the studio and over the theatre. So I'm going to just bring you around the theatre and talk about what the issues were in the design of in the sustainable design, in the kind of thinking long-term design of the building. Because the strange thing about arts projects, as I know from the first beginning, is that you only get a capital injection once, and then after that somebody has to run it. So what you need with an arts building is you need to spend all the money you can possibly spend at the beginning, spend every penny they give you, but set it up so that it can run on air. We had this idea that it would be made out of the streets. It's in a beautiful gridiron brick street landscape of Belfast, and we thought that the building should feel like it was made out of the streets itself and rising out of the street scape, and so we made it out of as exactly matching a brick as we could. And we also tried to disguise, and this is a fundamental thing for us at least, was we tried to disguise the old division in a theatre between the factory and the room. Most theatres are expressed by a fly tower. This building has full flying, so most buildings have a stump of a fly tower attached to which is a sort of a nest of an auditorium. So the diagram of pretty well every building since the Paris Opera is that plus that. And because we had this thought that it's a house for lyric and there isn't a division between front and back, even though the stage is a factory and the auditorium is a room, we tried to absorb it all into one form so that it would stand like an auditorium form in the whole city. And so somewhere in there is absorbed the machinery of the fly tower and the contraption of the room itself. And so it's all about the brick streets and brick roofs of Belfast. And then on the other side, which is a beautiful thing about Belfast if you haven't been there, is that always from this kind of hard city, because of the landscape, you can see the slope on the street that we were dealing with, but you always see out to the hills and to the landscape beyond. And in our particular site, we were on the edge of the river, so you couldn't be more urban on the street side, and then you couldn't be more pastoral on the Lagan side. The Lagan is like a big lazy river that actually ignores the city it passes through with great insouciance. And what we were trying to do is to treat the social space in the building like the Lagan does the brick town it goes through. Our first drawings and then how it gets built. We also had the privilege here of working with a fantastic building contractor who used all of his craft to make the best construction he could. And for me, that's a real pleasure that you just say to someone, just do the best you can. And actually they do better than what you might have thought they might do. It's in this lovely feeling of a kind of a woodland landscape. And there is a car park nearby that people come up at night or go home at night through this approach to the car park. And all the social areas of the building are open to the air or to the view. One of the discussions we had with the client group, because every single person, once they heard they were all involved, everyone got involved, and every single actor had an idea about rehearsal, which is that I thought actors were show-offs, and when we started, we made a glass rehearsal room, like up there, I suppose. And actually, we got that through our discussions with Gary Hines, because we were working for the Druid at the time, and Gary thought rehearsal should be on show. We proposed that to the Lyric, and a nearly nervous breakdown that all these shy actors said, no, nobody can look at us at all until we are ready for them to see us, and then they can all look at us. But so they wanted no windows in the rehearsal room, and no light, no daylight. They just wanted to go into a kind of cave and sulk or whatever. And we persuaded them that they should look out in the trees, and now this room at the top has these windows that look out that you'll see. But mainly it's an interior room, and it's a crucible, it's a quiet room where it all happens, and it's lifted up. It's this room at the top here that has no windows, that is in the trees. Below them, what you're looking at is the bar, and below them is the education room. But the reason to show you this picture is because that's the external auditorium that I think will be a lot of fun for outdoor performance, like you're saying, and for kids and for everyone to kind of pretend, a busload of people can be at the theatre, so to speak, in this lovely landscape by the river. It's just down that little hollow there, you go to the outdoor theatre. Or in the business, you go in under to catch your ticket to go in. You see that you have to begin to climb as soon as you've bought your ticket and go. And we were really trying to work this feeling of inside, outside at the entrance. So people queuing for tickets and people with their tickets are in the same kind of flip-flop kind of arrangement. So everyone is being drawn in and going upstairs to the theatre. It's a slow climb. It's about a full story that you have to go up to arrive. And we thought if we designed the balustrade of the stairs to look like they were walking on the stairs, that would encourage people to participate. So you and then you arrive at the top, and there's an information point and a place to buy the text of the play, and it's a greeting point where by now you have your tickets. And you're between, like you see, you're between these brick walls on both sides. So one side is the rehearsal room and the other side is into the studio. And above you are staff rooms that open out onto the river. One reason to show you this picture, it's just a tiny detail, but it's the whole core of how the sustainable drive of the building works here, is in the glass in that picture you see reflected some opening shutters like this high up. And what they are is they're connected to the building management system. So as the building, if you think of the building as a body, as the building heats up, these shutters open automatically, and the draw of air through that column of air ventilates the whole building. It's amazing to see it work, and it means that the building is never too warm, never too cold. And then you turn around on this river room and into the auditorium and around. Places to sit, places to stop. It's all made out of brick and timber. One of the windows we snuck into the rehearsal room is this little one up here. There's a curtain on it, but it means if you're in rehearsal, you can also pop out and peep down and see the ordinary people below, which increases your feeling of elevation, I think. And in the bar, it's a room for a party. There's one nice little detail in the bar that the people who are working in the office, I just said to them, just choose your favorite constellation. So various people who did the drawings, like Gary and Mark and so on, all have their own little favorite, either birth sign or in the lights, so they're in there forever. As you see, there's sliding screens to subdivide a big space depending on how you want to use it, and it all looks out to the river. So the rehearsal room is the first core space, and it looks, as you see, out this way. It has light this way, because it's just unnatural to provide a room, even for sulky introverted actors. It's unnatural to provide a room that has no light. And what's beautiful here, because we quieten the room with the acoustic treatment, it's very unlike this. It's a very hushed kind of room, and it will be very beautiful, I think, for poetry readings or for out loud readings or for intimate performance or for certain kinds of non-reverberant music, I think. The second space is the studio space, and it's thinking about found spaces. We really wanted this building, this studio, to feel as if it was, if you like, pre-existing before the rest of the building, as if it was the found space in the building. So we made it brick on the inside as well as on the outside. It feels like a warehouse. And in this case, we had to force the air down from above because of the flexibility of the space being used in every direction. We had to push air down, which is not what you would prefer to do, but it keeps the brick room open. So the whole room is made out of brick. And then as they stage it, like they have here for the Chelsea Hotel Brenda Behan play, they have an ordinary set, if you like, but it's in a flexible space. And this space is changeable in minutes and is used for all kinds of different activities, from cabaret to promenade to end on to traverse to pretty well every configuration, because of the tension wire grid that I'm afraid to walk on. The main auditorium is really, if I talk about learning, there's an enormous amount to learn about auditorium design, and we had a fantastic team of acoustician, theatre planner, environmental engineers, lighting consultants, the lighting technicians in the theatre itself, and all the actors. So there was a huge amount to kind of get going with. Our predisposition was that this thought that inside in one form we would absorb the height of the flying and the size of the auditorium inside in the form of the building. That was our beginning, and that the room might be like a sort of instrument in a larger case, like you open a case and there's the instrument. So we would make the room out of wood in a kind of concrete casing. Naive beginnings, as those of you who are experts will know, because we had everything wrong in this drawing. But we learned about how to adapt it. And even from the wrong starting point, it can lead you to an interesting conclusion. We wanted this idea that daylight comes into a room, which it can't in an auditorium, but we wanted to kind of pretend it could. So we designed it in cracked sections to allow the lighting to feel like it could be like daylight. And that developed into an interesting idea about lighting design, which then we had to model through computer analysis to make sure that the acoustic performance of the vaults, or the kind of bonnets that held the performance space, would be designed to bring the voice down to the audience, but also designed to allow light, that light to hit directly on the stage. So through computer modeling and through working with our theatre plan, who are our theatre consultants, we worked out a way of identifying the head space of every individual. These little spheres here are the audience heads, and 6 spots on the stage, and how the sightlines can work in different configurations for the lighting of the stage. All these balls here are in the computer model, all having perfect sightlines to the stage, or else you move them a little bit, and that affects how you design the seating. So it's a mixture of kind of intuitive fumbling and high technology resolution. The whole process of this interior is more intense. I have designed high-level clinical radioisotope laboratories in medical research, but nothing compared to doing a theatre. The point about the ventilation, because Antoinette asked me to speak about energy. If you push it down from above, you waste a lot of energy. If you bring air up from underneath, you can keep it perfect. So we made computer simulations of the disadvantages and the advantages of the displacement system that we have. We have a borehole down into the rock. We abstract water out of the ground. We use that to cool the air, so that on a low budget building we can keep everything under control with very minimal machinery and very little electricity and no big air handlers and no noise. And then we, in the end, to get it to be sure, we made a big model in the office of the whole place. And we were able to take all these bits out of the model and put them in again and check them and adjust. Every seat actually is modelled on both sides of the space, which was a lot of fun. The central proposition here is that the site is very tight, and you enter the auditorium at the back here, dead center to the stage, so you have a perfectly symmetrical view of the stage. But because of the site, you also must enter it on this side here, on our side of the photograph, but you can only enter from one side in the audience. So you have immediately a kind of pressure on the space that you're coming in one side and you're coming in this, but you don't come in the other. So to kind of cope with that, we dragged the audience aisle towards itself. So that means if you take a perfectly symmetrical situation and then you kind of just drag it over towards itself, and then you try and hold the audience in a body, like in a cup in your hand, even though it's creased like that, that people can see each other around, people can poke around and see each other, but everyone is focused to the stage. And then depending on whether they have a full house or not a full house, they can group the audience together, or you don't get this, they don't distribute like you guys are now. And then at the back, the rough structure, the box that the instrument comes in, is broken up to reflect the sound. And then what's kind of like a child's idea about stuff is that you can creep around like here behind the woodwork and then pop out and pretend you're the queen, on one of these balconies, which are very, very few. I think there's only 20 all balcony positions, but it populates the walls, and it's when you're up there in your in your favorite seat, you see the audience again as a community. So what I came to do, apart from showing you pictures of the new baby, is to say that I think you need two things to make work. You need to keep your mind open completely and collaborate with every person you meet. Work closely with every person you meet. But you also have to be stupidly and tenaciously tramping along your own kind of route, so that between this feeling of your own direction and gathering as you go, you have a more interesting life. Thanks very much. Thank you.